Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston and I'm joined as usual by Samuel Luckhurst. It's a lovely morning in Salford. The sun is out and we're here during the international break just to have another podcast and tidy up the bits that have been going on. Obviously, we recorded a podcast on Friday. We got into Erik ten Hag's future. We were going to start the podcast with that, but in hindsight, Samuel was right. People are probably bored to death of that situation. So we're actually going to start discussing the left-back situation at the club. Tyrone Marshall and Luke Shaw continue to be sidelined, I should say. And fans have been keeping an eye on Alvaro Fernandez's progress with Benfica. He obviously left the club in the summer on a permanent transfer. He has been excelling for Benfica. Performed very well in the Champions League against Atletico Madrid recently, and it does, dare I say, look like a mistake to let him go. Before we get into that, Samuel, I haven't asked you, how are you? I know I told you before we went there.
You never need to ask that question. We
It's
always
the formality,
have the
isn't it?
preamble.
It's the formality on the podcast.
I don't think I've listened to a good podcast that spends time asking people how they are and the weather's nice today.
It's a box ticking exercise. How are you, Samuel? Yeah, I'm great. Okay, let's move on.
Very British. It is very
Yes,
British.
That's what it is.
Yes.
Let's get into Fernandez, Samuel. Like I say, it does feel like a mistake now. He is performing so well. I did the article this morning that revealed the buyback clause inserted in the deal expires in 2026. So United have got around 20 months to make a decision. What's your thoughts on the whole situation with Fernandez? Because at the time when he left in the summer, I think we both agreed it had potential to be a mistake.
I think we also probably agreed that it was right to sell him as well, because under the incumbent manager, he was never going to get a look in. So there was no sense in keeping him. And there was a deal finalised there to, I think when he joined Benfica on loan in January, there was that, I can't remember if it was an option or an obligation to buy. I think there was an appearance mark he had to hit. He played a fair number of games, but when that deal was announced that it was being made permanent, it was the day after the FA Cup final, and a lot of United fans, I imagine, were probably still literally drunk after that wonderful day, and it didn't even cause a ripple, that news, because it was someone who had never played for the club, who had only been at the club for less than 4 years, and they were getting a pretty good fee from Benfica. But I think what we've been quite consistent in saying all along is that it didn't make any sense whatsoever never to actually properly use him or give him a proper go. Because in his Ten Hag's first tour, at the end of the Rangnick season, Fernandez was on the bench 4 times. Didn't come on to make his debut, of course, but I remember asking Rangnick, it might have been one of his last press conferences or possibly the final press conference at Carrington, about youngsters and who could be in the squad next season, because Garnacho just made his debut. Hannibal Mejbri was starting to get a little bit of exposure, and Fernandez was involved in some matchday squads. And Rangnick referred to 2 or 3 players, I think he said. And at that time, everyone took that as Garnacho, Mejbri, Fernandez. Come the pre-season tour in the summer, I think everybody, or certainly close observers of the academy, was surprised that Fernandez was not even in the pre-season tour squad for the games in Bangkok and Australia. And I think he said, at the time, he put something up on Instagram that kind of hinted at his feelings about that decision. United obviously had bought Tyrone Marshall. That was the left back who came in. They wanted to get rid of Alex Telles. He went to Sevilla on a season-long loan, and therefore it was logical for Fernandez to go out on loan to Preston, which he did for a season. And now, we've said this before, if United send a player on loan to a championship club, their thought process there is that player has the potential to come back and stay in the first team squad. And Fernandez played 42 times for Preston. Did he get their Young Player of the Year? He got some form
fantastic
of an award.
season, yeah.
And I think it was that. And you thought, well, he's on a good trajectory. Of course, United have got 2 senior left backs, but maybe he can be involved in some way or form, or have another good loan, wherever it may be. And then come that 2023 pre-season, that's when it changes. Because although Fernandez started the first 2 friendlies, which are let's face it, a lot of friendlies can be nothing friendlies, but it seems like United have mastered the nothing friendlies in recent years of playing in particularly the Norwegian friendlies, which really do not have, they're just exercises, really. It's just giving players a form of a slightly more intense run around for 45 minutes. So Fernandez started in that one, then he started against Lyon in, was that Edinburgh? Was that Murrayfield? I think
Yeah, I was at that
you were
game.
at that one, weren't you? So he started that one, came off at half time in both. And then on the pre-season tour, he was included in the first team squad, but then he didn't play whatsoever. Didn't against Arsenal, Real Madrid, or Dortmund. Didn't play in any of those games.
His only appearance came against Wrexham, of course. That was
which was an academy,
Samuel.
which of course was the academy friendly. So he actually had to drop down to get some playing time on that tour, and started for the academy in their game against Wrexham in San Diego. The one who did play during that tour and played quite a sizable amount, a lot more than I thought, just looking it up recently, was Brandon Williams, who played something like 2 hours across 3 games. And bearing in mind, in the previous 14 months, he'd played 5 minutes because he'd been out injured for 4 or 5 months. But the truth of the matter was that he was just not getting a look in because United had 2 left backs and Shaw and Malacia were fit for most of that time. And someone at United told us on that tour that they'd had a conversation with Williams that it was best for him to leave to go out and play regularly. What they were doing by playing him in those games was putting him in the shop window. And all it succeeded in doing was getting him a loan move to Ipswich. So at that point, they'd written off any chance of getting a fee for him because he'd entered the final year of his contract. And then with Alvaro Fernandez, who was not placed in the shop window, was not given that exposure, they actually got a reasonable fee for him from Benfica. And on the day that Fernandez joined Granada on loan, on transfer deadline day in September 2023, United loaned Sergio Reguilon, a left back from Tottenham, who was so meek he cried at full time in the dressing room after they'd lost to Newcastle in the League Cup, and his season-long loan was terminated at the earliest point possible in the winter transfer window. And during this whole time, Malacia has been injured and Luke Shaw has been injured for the vast majority of it. So this is happening a little bit with the McTominay deal as well, in that United sell a player where it's actually logical and sensible and understandable that they sell the player, but they've got to ensure that the incoming, who's going to effectively replace them, hits the ground running. Now, Reguilon didn't because he was dreadful. And Ugarte has come in as McTominay has gone out. Different player to McTominay, of course, and he's looked out of his depth in his first few weeks. He may get there eventually. We can't judge him now, but the early signs are not particularly encouraging. And it can't always just be rotten luck with this. And in the case of Fernandez, Ten Hag has clearly got an issue with judgment at left back, because I don't think Malacia, from what we've seen of him in that first season, was he a player that they should have been, gazumping Lyon to sign from Feyenoord in the summer of 2022. I don't think so. He's of course missed a hell of a lot of football through two knee operations. He's not played for United since May 2023. Luke Shaw got a 5-year contract on Ten Hag's watch. This isn't just exclusive to Luke Shaw. It really does baffle me that United are still doling out 5-year contracts to existing players and to signings. I think that they should have changed the strategy there, where you have a new player or an existing player gets a 4-year contract, and say they hit an appearance mark, or they get a certain amount of goals or assists or clean sheets, that can trigger another year. I think that would be that incentivizes the player to perform. But this whole 5-year thing, United are already looking a bit silly with a couple of contracts they've negotiated in the past 18 months, where it already feels like that they are saddled with players that are not playing enough, or that there are issues with their conditioning in Shaw's case. And so it's just not a good look. And you can't say it's just rotten luck that Malacia has been out injured for as long as he has been, that Shaw has been as injury prone as he has been over the past, it's probably more, it's near 14 months, isn't it? Because it was August last year when he got injured at Tottenham in the second game of the season. And while you do all that, you sell an academy left back who United signed from Real Madrid, who was one of their last headline academy additions in 2020. He goes to a big club in Portugal, Benfica, the biggest club in Portugal, where there is intense scrutiny, certainly within the Portuguese borders. He started 7 games on the spin. He is their starting left back now, and he was the man of the match in their Champions League drubbing of Atletico Madrid. This isn't all just bad luck. There is a lot of bad judgment. There's probably more bad judgment than bad luck regarding all that. So it's incredible when you consider 5 different left backs who've had various look-ins under Ten Hag, and the one who's playing in the Champions League at the moment and has just got a man of the match award and is playing for a big club in the Champions League as well, is the one they ended up selling, and is the one who got the least amount of playing time under Ten Hag.
It's fascinating that 2 United managers have overlooked Alvaro Fernandez, because when you think back, as you mentioned, to Ralph Rangnick's time, at the end of that season, during his interim tenure, we both agreed at the time when United were away at Crystal Palace at Selhurst Park, that would have been the ideal game for Fernandez to make his debut. Yet Alex Telles was picked at left back, and that really seemed like a strange one, considering
Shola Shortiri came on that day,
there you go.
which was odder as well.
It was really odd, wasn't it? Because he just won reserve team player of the year as well, so reserve player of the year. And then the sliding doors moment, you actually just mentioned Shaw picking up an injury against Tottenham in that second game. The game after that, United played Nottingham Forest. Dalot started at left back. Fernandez was named on the bench. And if he hadn't already got the message in pre-season, that was probably the final nail in the coffin, because Dalot was getting played out of position. Ten Hag at that time was using him at right back, and Dalot played at left back. Fernandez was an unused substitute. Obviously joined Granada not long after that. And his quotes were really interesting when he joined Granada on loan, because he said, "What message did United give to me? That I should go out on loan, and that Ten Hag didn't count on me, that I should continue to gain experience, and we'll see what happens in the future." He was obviously recalled in the January with a view to joining Benfica on a permanent deal. You've said it really well there, Samuel, in your answer. There is bad judgment, and an element of bad luck, I guess, but poor planning. We keep mentioning poor planning on this podcast, and it comes back to that point with Fernandez. But having said that, United did get €6 million for him, with 3 million in add-ons, and as we said in the summer, that was reasonable for a player, wasn't it? Fernandez's standard and quality and what he's achieved in the game. And also, we should praise the club, because in the past they wouldn't have actually inserted a buyback deal, would a buyback clause, and that changed this summer. They were doing that a lot more often in sales of these players from the academy, which you can kind of make up for your mistake. If a player goes on and kicks on and progresses, it makes you look a bit daft. You can atone for that mistake and trigger the buyback clause.
Yeah, and that's been a development since before Ineos came in. In fairness, it's been ramped up with Ineos overseeing transfers, but it did start to creep in last year. I can't remember the specific examples, but buzzwords like sell-on percentage regarding academy sales, that they did start to creep up. Maybe there was an element of it was Zidane Iqbal when he moved to Utrecht at the start of the 2023 summer transfer window. I can't quite remember specifically, but United have become a lot more proactive at selling academy players that they have decided, or the manager's decided, are just not going to get a look in. And that's why, as I said earlier, it was understandable, logical, sensible even, that Alvaro Fernandez was sold to Benfica in the summer, because he was only ever named on the bench, picked on the bench once by Ten Hag, and that was enforced by, as you just said, Shaw's injury. The following week, he left on loan to move back to Spain and play for Granada for 5 months. And last season for him, it wasn't a season where you watched Fernandez's progress in Spain and Portugal and thought he'd had a really, that was a compelling case for United to recall him, or for him to get a look in back at United. It just petered out for him at United, and everyone realised that when he moved to Spain. And those quotes there that you just brought up regarding his move to Granada, he'd have known there and then that he wasn't going to get a look in back at United unless there was a managerial change. But the fact that he was sold permanently before the club had confirmed that they were going to keep Ten Hag was also telling. It was just he'd come to the end of the road at United. But it's what happened, as I said before then, and in the summer of 2022 and the summer of 2023, where there were clearly mistakes made, and it seemed logical to give him a go, to play him ahead of Brandon Williams. It's very rare that the shop window tactic comes out so brazenly as it did during that 23 tour, with Williams getting the amount of playing time that he got for United in the States. And all they succeeded in doing was, as I said, getting him a loan deal, a loan move to Ipswich Town, who fortunately for him were managed by his former youth team coach at United, Kieran McKenna, and also for a little bit in the first team as well. So it's definitely more bad judgment than bad luck. And look, this period that Fernandez is playing for Benfica, it could just be a purple patch. He a bit like Malacia at the start of the 22-23 season. He had a really good 4-game starting run, it felt like, for United in the league, where they won all their games. They didn't concede many goals. Maybe Fernandez's peak at Fernandez was the Champions League game against Atletico Madrid. But it also wouldn't be a surprise if he maintains this form and he attains international honours with Spain. And Benfica have got reasonable history of allowing left-backs to thrive. Fabio Quintral was a very good left-back before he joined Real Madrid, and he spent a fair few years in Madrid. Grimaldo, of course, left Benfica, I think, last year to join Bayer Leverkusen. Then he played an integral role in Bayer Leverkusen, winning the Bundesliga title and ending Bayern Munich's monopoly of the league in Germany, and he started for Spain at the weekend. So it's a really good opportunity for Alvaro Fernandez. He didn't start the season in the starting 11 at Benfica, but he's taken his opportunity. And as I said, I think he started 7 games on the spin now, and the evidence is quite overwhelming. Looking at Ten Hag's handling of left backs at United, that suggests that it is a problem there, and that has been the real big problem position. And it's another problem now where they're going to have one senior fullback fit this weekend, it looks like, against Brentford, and the left back who did very well on tour, Harry Amas, he's actually barely trained with the first team so far this season. And in fairness to Ten Hag, he said to us at the start of August he needed a few more months. We are approaching the end of that period now, where you'd expect Amas to get a look in, but it's impossible to predict. I mean, Leicester at home in the League Cup would feel like a good opportunity, you'd feel, to put him in, but Ten Hag seldom does weaken sides. And as we saw against Barnsley, Ethan Wheatley didn't even come on to get a kick in a game that United trounced Barnsley 7-0.
And even if that was Alvaro Fernandez's peak in that Champions League game, you'd still back him to have a better career than Brandon Williams, who is now without a club. There's obviously off-field issues there that I can't get into, but at the end of their careers, whenever that may be, I'm absolutely certain Fernandez will look back and would have achieved more in the game. It already looks like that already, clearly. We'll move on then, Samuel. We've done that quite nicely there. Gareth Southgate, we'll come on to him, because he ruled himself out of the job, which was music to United fans' ears, because there was always uncertainty with the pressure increasing on Erik ten Hag and Gareth Southgate still waiting in the wings. It just didn't look good for United fans. They weren't happy to see that, but he has said that he's going to take a year out of the game at least before he considers another job. Good news, isn't it, I guess, if you're a United fan?
Yeah, I think that it always seemed, even though his odds would have been quite short until last week, by virtue of his association with Brailsford, Ashworth, and the job he did with England, that it always felt quite fanciful, that, because if this is a club where the power brokers can be swayed by fan sentiment, which is absolutely what happened over the cup final and keeping the manager when they should have sacked the manager in the summer, then they couldn't justify going for a guy who is clearly, unpopular with United fans, or certainly the prospect of him managing United was always going to be unpopular with United supporters. You've got to be realistic with these things. If you scan across or up and down the Premier League table, it's difficult to really look at a club and think, I could see them hiring Gareth Southgate as their next manager. Maybe Everton at some point, with the new ownership coming in, maybe that is feasible. But he's someone who's possibly, through managing at international level for such a long time, it might actually restrict the opportunities he gets at club level. We saw this with Joachim Löw at Germany, where he was the coach for what, it must have been 12 years, maybe a little bit longer. I think he replaced Jurgen Klinsmann after
There was a lot of smelling
2006
fingers
World
in
Cup.
that time, wasn't
Yeah. The less said about that, the better. But he was someone who used to get linked with the Real Madrid job, and he's clearly not going to get that now, because he was, I think, mainly because he was an international manager for such a long time, and you don't see him appear on bookies' chalkboards for next manager of any of these clubs. I know there have been some exceptions, and I've no doubt that Julian Nagelsmann will be an exception, but I'm not expecting him to be in charge of the German national team for a decade, or a decade plus, I should say. And Southgate and United just would not have. It would never have worked, and it is a relief for United that I mean, unless they keep Ten Hag for a year and then decide, oh, Gareth's year is up, let's change manager now. I suspect that will not happen, but it would not have worked. It was just a complete mismatch, and I think from trying to get something more on it, it seemed like that nothing concrete was happening there anyway. But there was always going to be a lot of noise because he was the former England manager, and he's got some pals in the director's box at United who he gets on well with, or got on well with in Dan Ashworth's case when Ashworth worked for the FA. But as I said last week, there have been 3 men in the history of human civilization who've managed United to the English title, and Gareth Southgate would not be the 4th. Erik Ten Hag won't be the 4th either. I'm pretty certain. So that's what it boils down to when it comes to making signings, or certainly in the case of choosing the manager. United have got to hire someone that they believe will actually lead them to the title.
I've always said these days, international management and club management, it's just so different. It's almost like a different sport now. And I contradict myself in a way, because I think Southgate's done a fantastic job for England. I was one of those who defended his record: 2 major finals, the semi-final of the World Cup, reconnecting fans to the team, etc., all that good work. But on the flip side, I absolutely thought no for United. He could never manage Manchester United. That was obvious, wasn't it? And we've said that all along for the last 6 months, or however long he's been linked with the job. But hopefully now he's ruled himself out, those articles will go away. We'll leave that there for part 1. We'll be back in a moment for part 2. Welcome back to the Manchester is Red podcast. Now, with Southgate ruling himself out of the job and Lee Carsley not getting himself the job, Samuel, he's also not going to get the role. Thomas Tuchel has been linked with England, and there's obviously interest in Tuchel from United at the moment, with Ten Hag looking like set to leave the club in the next few weeks, perhaps. Is that maybe to be expected because of the links with United to Tuchel? Is it Tuchel's camp putting pressure on United? Is there an element of that? Is that the way you've been thinking when you've seen those reports?
No, I just view it as someone who's out of work and has worked in England and is an impressive coach. And logically, of course, he's going to be seen as a possible England manager, where Carsley is, let's face it, over the past week, he's blown it with the tactical debacle against Greece, and almost as farcical were his post-match quotes. And
yeah, it's his press conferences for me. He just doesn't look cut out for the role, does he? At all, his personality.
Well, when you're saying, I'll get back to the under-21s, and then on Sunday when he said that it should be a world-class coach who's won trophies, that's him out for the count, because he's not a world-class coach and he's not won trophies at senior level. So that's the FA's mind made up for them in regarding Lee Carsley. They will not be appointing from within. He'll manage the next 2 games unless something happens in the next few weeks for the November internationals, which creates an interesting dynamic, because there'll be some notable omissions from that squad, no doubt. But I think players will be kind of blasé about it, because they know that he's not going to be the coach for the next international get-together in March, by which time England absolutely have to have a new permanent coach appointed. It would be absolutely ridiculous if the FA haven't finished that process when Southgate left in July. The closing date for applications on the FA website was 2nd of August. So if we get around to March, which is going to be 7 months on, and they've still not got a permanent coach, that would also be quite farcical. And the World Cup will be coming along pretty soon at that point as well. So I think it's safe to say that we'll know the identity of the next permanent England manager by the time of the spring internationals. But I don't really. I still think that given the very good job Southgate did, and he did a very good job, not just in terms of tournament performance, but reconnecting the fan base with the national team and supporters falling in love with the national team again, even though at the end of it, a lot of them had fallen out of love with him, and you had some absolute ingrates at some of the games in Germany chucking beer at him. Unfortunately, every set of matchgoers will have that minority of morons, and England are no exception. It's quite,
you probably get more for England, don't you?
Yeah, you get some real idiots following England. It's one of the reasons why it doesn't. I think actually actively supporting England doesn't appeal to me. I mean, I fell out of love with the national side after the 2006 World Cup because I thought it was disgraceful how that was managed. And of course, it's dreadful what happened to Sven-Göran Eriksson with him this year, and very, very sad. But it's difficult to really convey to people who didn't live through that period how unpopular he became because of the 2006 World Cup performance, and him obviously having dalliances with other prospective employers while he was in charge of the national side. But the way that 2006 World Cup was handled was dreadful, and I think it did a lot of damage regarding supporters following the national side. And that's what I mean when I said the fact that Southgate came in 10 years later, he did great work in reconnecting the fan base and making following England enthralling and exciting again. And that absolutely was the case, even though there were fundamental issues with the way he coached them in certain games, in the most important games, let's face it, at major tournaments, Croatia in the semi-finals, Italy in the final, and then Spain in the final, less so France in that quarter-final defeat. I don't agree, as we've said before, with Tyrone saying England were the best team at the 2022 World Cup, but
I'm somewhere in between. I don't think it's as ludicrous. I mean, it is a bit of a silly statement, but me and Ty both agreed if you play that game against France 10 times, I think England win it 8 out of 10 times, I believe.
It'd be interesting if teams, if that actually
That's
happened.
not how football works, is it? So it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Just reconvene the next day in Doha or wherever it was played to try and play it again. But I remember saying to my dad after that game that they should change coach, because I thought, in a way, because England had gone out palatably, it felt like for the fan base anyway, it was almost another reason why Southgate should go, because I just got the sense that night that as long as he was England coach, they'd never win a major trophy, and that proved to be the case, even though they gave a good fist of it at the Euros, despite performing very unconvincingly in the run-up to that final when they lost to Spain. But with Tuchel, I think because of Southgate, because of the job Southgate did, they need an English coach, and I think the FA would be inclined to go for an English manager. Even though I didn't have a problem.
Don't say it.
I didn't have. I don't know what you think I'm going to say.
Eddie Howe is heavily linked.
Oh no.
It's been tipped up on Sky Sports this morning.
I never had a problem with Eriksson being put in charge at the start of 2001 when he came in, and there were some pieces written at that time that are just borderline xenophobic or jingoistic regarding a foreigner taking charge of the England national team. And I don't think anybody had a problem when Capello came in 2007-8, because Steve McLaren had been an absolute disaster. I mean, the great football journalist Brian Glanville said he was by far and away the worst England manager of his lifetime. And so people, I think, welcomed Capello coming in. Of course, after Capello went, there was a clamour for an English manager again because people took umbrage with his English and the performances weren't good. But we're now back at that point where I think there would be an appetite for a foreign coach to come in. But I also think that there are some pretty good English coaches. And I'm not going to say Eddie Howe. I have always genuinely thought, I probably said it 2 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. I always thought Graham Potter had the makings of an England coach. Whether he'd want to do that at this point in his career, he is becoming a lot more visible. Where he's been out of work for it's got to be close to 18 months now, I'd have thought. And
it's always
he's
a
going to be
sign
itching.
when managers go on
Yeah.
Monday Night Football, isn't it? It's a cliche,
Yeah,
but it's true
yeah.
that they are ready to return to management. At that point.
Pochettino did it, didn't he? Pochettino did it while Solskjaer was having a difficult time at United, and the timing of that was not coincidental. And they're always very polite. Oh, I don't want to say this, and by saying that, they're almost making a little bit more of it than had they actually outright said, "Yeah, I want that guy's job." But I think Potter would be a good choice. Eddie Howe would obviously be a good choice as well because he's done brilliant work at Bournemouth and Newcastle, and you could absolutely see that. But I don't think that's a poor choice. Just going off those two, if England were to be of the if the FA were to be of the persuasion of hiring an English coach, but equally, if Tuchel was to go there, that would be a coup for them as well. It is interesting how just looking at the mention of Pochettino, how quickly he jumped into that US men's national team job, because I think it was common knowledge that the US wanted a superstar coach, or certainly a world-renowned coach ahead of the 26 World Cup, which of course the States are primarily hosting with Canada, and some games being played in Canada and Mexico, but it is pretty much the US World Cup. And they were looking, there was some chatter about Klopp, some chatter about Guardiola, but they went for Pochettino. But I was still slightly surprised that Pochettino just jumped into a national team role at this stage in his career. He didn't do badly at Chelsea. I think everybody knows that was the problem. There was the ownership at Chelsea, the decision makers at Chelsea, rather than the coach. He was starting to make some headway towards the end of that season, but. So that just goes to show that sometimes managers can be, or coaches can be, impatient. But that said, Tuchel, a bit like Pochettino, he only lost his job, left Bayern Munich in the summer. So we'll wait and see how impatient he is, or whether it's he's just holding out for the United job, which still feels like it could come off.
You said when we discussed Sven-Göran Eriksson that he was unpopular with England fans at the end of his England reign, but after watching his documentary on Amazon, which was brilliant, I must say, if you've not watched that, check it out. He was popular with the opposite sex, wasn't he, Sven-Göran Eriksson?
Well, yes, yeah, he probably should have. In fact, this was my first exclusive that I never actually used when it was I don't know if people remember it, but in around August 2004. It emerged that Eriksson and the FA chief executive Mark Palios had an affair with a secretary at the FA called Faria Alam, and it was post Euro 2004 where England had gone out at the quarterfinals again, and there was a bit of a clamour for Eriksson to lose his job. And I was on holiday in Florida walking with my dad around a shopping mall, and who's there on the bench as we're walking through? But Sir Geoff Hurst, and my dad. Quick-witted, quick thinking rather, went into a shop and asked if they had a piece of paper and a pen, please. And I'd normally be I'm far too shy to do these things, but I was with my dad, who's the opposite, and we requested his autograph. So I got Geoff Hurst's autograph, which I've still got. I need to do something with it one day, get it framed maybe. But my dad said to him, do you think Eriksson should go? And he said, yeah, the FA should sack him. So I thought that, in retrospect, that was a pretty good line. The England World Cup hero saying the FA should sack Sven-Göran Eriksson. I did not. No, my 16-year-old. This is the thing. My first exclusive that I never actually did anything with. But yeah,
you could have emailed the desk, couldn't you, and teased an exclusive? I could have actually got your way in that way.
I know. I'd done my work experience at the Daily Telegraph that summer as well, so I should have been a lot more proactive. But no, I wasn't even green. I was worse than green back then. I should have been. Maybe I wasn't cut out for journalism at that point, but I got there eventually.
We'll move on now to what you wanted to discuss the most. We discussed it on Friday. There's not a huge amount to add, is there, with Erik ten Hag? He's expected to be in charge of Brentford. He might get sacked in the next few days. Who knows? But we're not expecting that to happen. On Saturday afternoon, obviously, United play with Brentford at 3 p.m. More importantly, they're going to have the press conference on Thursday. And it's going to be fascinating to hear what Ten Hag says in that press conference.
It will be. I mean, it could be one of those. Sometimes when there's a quite highly anticipated press conference, it can be underwhelming. And I don't know if we've discussed it before, but there is definitely a difference in terms of how Ten Hag interacts with the open section, where the questions are normally asked by PA, BBC, Sky, TalkSport sometimes, PLP, which are Premier League productions. And then for the dailies, which of course the MEN, Mirror, Sun, Guardian, Telegraph, Times, etc., ESPN, Athletic on our side. So that's how it's split into two sections. And sometimes it's a case of just him having to warm up. And so that's why the open section can be quite underwhelming at times, which does frustrate those in the open section who ask the questions. And it's in our interest as well, because we will be writing up those quotes and we want good copy from it as well, even though we're not going to be asking questions in that section. So of course, they're going to be the ones who start the ball rolling on Thursday. But last week it felt like it could be busy, and then it ended up not being busy. There were a couple of meetings. United refused to clarify Ten Hag's position. The fact that they were refusing to clarify Ten Hag's position was news in itself, given the situation going on, where there is such scrutiny regarding his position and such uncertainty over it as well. It was on Friday at nearly 5 p.m. that I finally got like a concrete steer where I could write Ten Hag is expected to stay. And by that time, I'm fully aware of it. Like the horse had well and truly bolted. The assumption already was that he would be staying for at least for the Brentford game. And also 5 p.m. on a Friday is absolutely the worst time for the news cycle, as we both know. Nobody is, Fridays, people are effectively, they've logged off regarding work. They're in weekend mode already. It's the worst day for news. It can be a bit of a slog. So in terms of doing that story at the time, I knew that this is the worst time possible to put out a story like this. And also given the week we've had, it's pretty obvious that he's sticking with it. But I had been persevering, just trying to get a concrete steer from someone who was credible that he would be staying. And finally, I managed to do that, but at the worst time possible.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I actually scheduled my Manu article on a bit of a contract update for Sunday morning, and we were going to run that on Sunday. And when I was setting up my tweet and scheduling it, which you can do on Twitter, I actually clicked post by accident. So I tweeted the tweet without the article, and aggregator accounts picked it up. So that's crap. So I've had to publish the article. What a bad mistake. Absolutely amateur. Almost as bad as you not writing your Jeff Hurst exclusive. Almost as bad as that at 16 years old.
Yeah.
But you were 16 and I'm 25,
just,
so what is my excuse?
That just goes you to show how parasitic those aggregator accounts are. They've got
within seconds.
I know it's pathetic that people spend their lives like that. And then the weird one is that occasionally there's been correspondence with students who studying journalism, and that's their route into journalism, in inverted commas. It's working with that. Do you think have any of them actually asked the question, is that good for the journalistic industry? It's pretty mind-boggling how naive they can be. But
we'll do another podcast on that another time. I think we'll dedicate a podcast to the industry and how it operates. I'm sure people will love to hear that. Lastly then, Samuel, more contract chat. You've done an article today saying there is decisions to be made on 6 players' contracts. I'll click on the article because I do have it up to remind myself of those players. I mean, you could just rattle them off the top of your head, couldn't you? Tom Heaton, Johnny Evans, Victor Lindelof and Christian Eriksen, they've all entered the final years of their contracts. Same with Harry Maguire and Ahmad, but the caveat is the 1-year extension in their contracts is expected to be triggered. Out of the 4 players who have entered the final years of their deals, would you offer any of those new contracts. I was in favour of giving Evans a 1 year extension last year. That's already been vindicated by his performance against Aston Villa, but he'll be another year older. We'll have to see, I think, in terms of another extension. And Christian Eriksen, he's enjoyed a bit of a renaissance, hasn't he, in the last month or so? He had a bit of a purple patch. He obviously made that mistake against FC20, but he scored a fantastic goal. So those two players stand out. And I guess Tom Heaton, because he's always there. He's a fantastic thrower around the place. That's a cliche again, but he's a fantastic understudy goalkeeper, isn't he? It's unique, that role. You need a certain kind of character to fill that position.
I think with Heaton and Evans, they're, as we saw in the summer, it's a flexible situation in that their family bases are in the northwest. They're academy graduates. It's not going to, if they want to keep them, if they want to stay, that shouldn't be too difficult, and you can play that by ear. Evans, I thought that there was a compelling case to keep him. There was also a compelling case just to say thank you for the year and goodbye, especially as he came on in the FA Cup final, and it was a good way to go out if he wanted to do that. But as he showed at Villa 8 days ago, he's still capable of performing at the Premier League level at the age of 36, and I think that decision will be taken with him. I imagine it'll be taken towards the end of the season, if not after the season has ended, because it's flexible. Lindelof will almost certainly be let go. They were trying to sell him in the summer, they couldn't because he was injured for the majority of it. They can't obtain a fee for him in January unless a Premier League club or an English club want to buy him there and then. I don't think an English club will be doing that. So overseas clubs, if they want to, they can agree a pre-contract deal with Lindelof. But I suspect that he'll just be the intention anyway at this point is to release him at the end of the season, and I think that should happen with Eriksen as well. Even though he's had a recent purple patch, it's been quite surprising how prominent he's been over the past month, starting 6 of the 7 games United had between the September and October internationals. But let's face it, the manager will probably change at United, if not this calendar year, then the next calendar year. Eriksen turns 33 in February. There were signs of fatigue in his first season at United. He does perform a decent role in the squad, but if he's off the wage bill, it's leverage to freshen up the midfield, more leverage to freshen up the midfield next summer, which they will need to do because Casemiro is still there, and they've got to try and sell Casemiro by hook or by crook next year. So I think it's just logical to have a changing of the guard with Eriksen and Casemiro going. And I know that you need experience here and there, but Eriksen signed on it was just a straight 3-year deal, no +1. I think it's pretty logical to leave it at that. I think it would be harking back to previous regimes if they were to try and renegotiate completely new terms with him, because that's what they'd have to do. So I think that would still be heading in that direction there with Eriksen. And I think an interesting one is Maguire, because we've already seen with Lindelof that triggering the 1-year extension was a mistake. In that he was injured at the time. He's missed 22 games this calendar year as well, and he was injury prone he was injured for the majority of pre-season as well, which prevented them from selling him. So I think if they could turn back time, they would they'd leave that extension option dormant and just have released him in the summer. And unfortunately for Maguire, he is starting to become a little bit injury prone. He was injured in February, March time. He was out for a while. He got injured towards the end of the season, missed the run-in, missed the FA Cup final, missed the European Championship. He's got injured again recently. He's going to be out for a few weeks. So when he comes back, he really, really does need to stay fit. They've not extended his contract yet. They've not even taken that decision yet. So that will normally, those decisions get made around Christmas time, which was the case with Lindelof and Aaron Wan-Bissaka last year. And it was pretty obvious when they extended those players' contracts, they were only doing so with a view to obtaining a fee for them in the summer. They managed to do that with Wan-Bissaka. They didn't manage to do that with Lindelof because he was injured.
He has picked up a few more injuries, Maguire, and at unfortunate times as well, as we've discussed. One thing I will say, though, about that March-April period when he did pick up an injury, he was clearly pushing his body through the barrier, wasn't he? And I don't think every player in that squad would have been as committed as he was in that period, because he was needed. There was no players available in defence, and Maguire just kept on playing through little niggles. Do you remember when we were at Bournemouth and he held his hamstring, and we expected him to be taken off at half time? He comes out, he plays again, he doesn't train, he plays against Coventry in the semi-final of the FA Cup. So he does really push his body. That is clear of Maguire. You can't doubt that.
No, I think it's a weird one, but I think he's had a really good calendar year, even though it's probably been, for him, it's probably been one of the most disappointing calendar years he's had in his career, in that he missed the FA Cup final, which he'd have started in had he remained fit for the rest of that run-in, and he missed the Euros as well. So 2 really colossal disappointments. But he's had a few muscular injuries this year. And when he missed the Tottenham game recently, I think he sustained a dead leg, and he felt his calf, which was the problem towards the end of last season, wasn't it? So that's why he wasn't risked against Tottenham. Comes on against Porto, scores. Everyone, any right-minded United fan says to themselves, right, he's, especially given De Ligt's performance that night, Maguire's got to start 3 days later against Aston Villa. He did, and unfortunately he got injured. So I think I don't blame anyone for that injury. Really, Maguire had to start. It's just, I think that's more that is genuinely unfortunate that came about, because he merited a return to the lineup that day, and just so happens that he only lasted 45 minutes.
I think when we did our podcast in the summer and we did the keep or sell segment, I think I actually said I'd give him a new deal instead of extending his contract. I think I suggested giving him a 2-year contract is what I would do. And I'm going to make a potentially ludicrous statement here, but I could actually see him seeing his career out at the club. He's 31 now. He turns 32 in March. If you give him another 2 years, players these days are playing until they're 36, 37, aren't they? So maybe a move to Everton away, it's when he's 37. But I could generally see him staying at the club for a good few more years, Harry Maguire. I think he's got a role to play. That's not starting every week, but
it's a huge 11, 12 months for him now, because what happens within that period will have a huge bearing on the World Cup in 2026, because that's something else to consider next summer, in the players will want to be certain of playing time in the run up to the World Cup. And already Maguire's been omitted from an England squad by Lee Carsley, which I didn't agree with. I wasn't surprised by, just because I thought, given that he wasn't starting Premier League games, Carsley would hold that against him. But I didn't agree with it, and it certainly, given the chopping and changing that's gone on in defence and how they defended against Greece, it pretty much backfired, that move as well. Looking at England's defenders in that squad, there's no way that all of them are better than Maguire, especially given Maguire's form for England as well. But regardless of whether United extend the contract or not, he is going to have to be in a position where he's playing regularly in the 25-26 season, in the run-up to the World Cup. And look, a hell of a lot is going to change over the next 11 months. The England manager is going to change. The United manager is probably going to change as well, and they will probably have bearings on what Maguire decides to do next summer. But last year, that £30 million move to West Ham collapsed. If he is at United in the summer and there's a possibility of him being sold, they're not going to be looking for £30 million. They're probably not even going to be looking for £20 million. So I think a 32-year-old Harry Maguire at about 10 or 15 million pounds, that would appeal to quite a few Premier League clubs if they're of that persuasion, and if Maguire is of that persuasion. But as I said, a hell of a lot is going to happen over the next 11 or 12 months.
That's a very good point with the World Cup in 2026. We'll leave it there, Samuel. Around 50 minutes for the podcast. Thanks for your time as usual.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
I think we're both about to hobble off, aren't we? Because I've run a half marathon, so I look like the penguin. I'm walking like the penguin, and you're similar as well with your injury that you've got.
I am, so yeah.
We'll hobble off the podcast. Thanks to listeners as usual. We'll be back later in the week. Speak then. Take care.